Midnight skies turned to fire. Cities shaken. Missiles in the hundreds. Civilians running for cover as sirens screamed and explosions tore through the silence. This isn't a border clash. It's a coordinated, multi-front assault that could ignite the entire Middle East. Israel, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, and maybe more are now one wrong move away from full-scale war. How did it start? Who's really behind it? And just how close are we to global disaster? Stay with us. The answers will shock you. The sky lit up like fireworks, but this was war. The night was still, too still. Then, without warning, the darkness exploded. A deafening boom shattered the silence, followed by a blinding flash that lit up the horizon. For a moment, it looked like fireworks. But this wasn't celebration. This was destruction. Across the region, people woke to the terrifying sound of air raid sirens. In cities like Haifa, Damascus, and Beirut, the flashing red lights reflected off glass windows as residents scrambled for cover. Phones buzzed with emergency alerts. Some families barely had seconds to reach underground shelters. Witnesses described the chaos as surreal, like something out of an apocalypse movie, one resident said. We could hear the whistling of rockets in the sky. Then came the explosions. Again and again. We thought it would never stop. At least 60 missiles were launched within the first 2 hours. Defense systems like Israel's Iron Dome sprang into action, lighting up the sky with a deadly game of interception. Bright trails zigzagged overhead as anti-missile systems tried desperately to shoot down incoming threats. Some were intercepted. Others weren't. One missile slammed into a fuel depot in Ashkelon, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air. Another struck near a military checkpoint in southern Syria. Fires burned through the night as emergency services struggled to contain the damage. What made this moment different wasn't just the volume of firepower. It was the coordination. Rockets were coming from multiple directions, southern Lebanon, western Syria, and even suspected drone activity over the Red Sea. The attacks were not random. This was a synchronized assault. Tensions in the region had been simmering for weeks. But this was an eruption. Panic gripped the streets. Supermarkets were overrun with people stocking up on supplies. Schools announced closures. Flights were grounded. People sent hurried texts to loved ones. Are you safe? Where are you? Don't go outside. And through it all, the skies kept burning. The noise, the fear, the smell of smoke and fuel, all of it etched into memory in real time. No one knew what the morning would bring. But one thing was clear. The Middle East was no longer on the brink. It was in the fire. A chain reaction. How one attack ignited a regional firestorm. To understand how this chaos began, we have to rewind the clock. Just a few days earlier, to the Syrian capital, Damascus. There, a precision airstrike, widely believed to be carried out by Israeli fighter jets, destroyed a convoy near the Damascus International Airport. The target? A senior commander of an Iranian-backed militia group, known to have coordinated operations across Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. That single moment, captured by CCTV and broadcast across Arabic news channels, sent shockwaves through the region. The images showed fire consuming the convoy in black, smoke rising over the tarmac. Within hours, militant factions declared revenge would be swift and merciless. And it was. 2 nights later, over 100 rockets were fired into Israeli territory from multiple launch sites in Gaza. But it didn't stop there. Within 24 hours, militants in southern Lebanon, believed to be aligned with Hezbollah, launched their own salvo of long-range rockets, targeting northern Israeli cities and military bases. The barrage overwhelmed Israel's Iron Dome system. While it intercepted many, several missiles broke through, damaging homes, injuring civilians, and triggering mass evacuations in towns like Kiryat Shmona and Safed. In retaliation, Israel launched airstrikes deep into Lebanon and Syria, targeting what it called terrorist infrastructure, weapons depots, and command centers. Massive explosions lit up the night sky. Reports suggested these strikes may have also hit Iranian Revolutionary Guard operatives embedded in the region. This tit-for-tat exchange is nothing new. But this time, something was different. Experts noted the unusual coordination between the various militant groups. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and pro-Iranian militias in Syria. These factions, though often divided by geography and leadership, seemed to be acting in sync, suggesting a higher command structure was involved. Many analysts began pointing fingers at Tehran. Iran has long supported proxy forces across the Middle East, using them to apply pressure on Israel and Western allies without direct confrontation. If Iran was indeed orchestrating a multi-front escalation, the implications were massive. This could be a deliberate test of Israel's ability to handle simultaneous threats, or worse, a push toward regional war. And Israel responded accordingly. Its military went on high alert, mobilizing tens of thousands of reservists and repositioning key air and naval assets. The Northern Front, in particular, saw a huge buildup of forces. Military officials warned that they were preparing for sustained conflict, if necessary. The mood inside Israel shifted overnight. This was no longer just a border flare-up. It was a national crisis. Meanwhile, Syrian air defenses scrambled to intercept Israeli warplanes. Reports from Damascus described sonic booms and fireballs in the sky. Civilian neighborhoods shook from the blasts. Some residents believed they were witnessing the early hours of a regional war. All the while, global powers watched nervously. Would this conflict remain contained between a few players? Or would it pull in others? Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't just retaliation. This wasn't just defense. This was escalation, deliberate, calculated, and very, very dangerous. Caught in the crossfire, civilians pay the highest price. As missiles rained from the sky and fighter jets roared overhead, it wasn't politicians or commanders who paid the immediate price. It was ordinary people. In Tel Aviv, a missile evaded the Iron Dome and slammed into a quiet suburban apartment block. The explosion ripped through the second floor. Inside, a family of 5 had just sat down for dinner. The father, a delivery driver, was killed instantly. His wife and 2 children were pulled from the rubble hours later, alive, but with severe burns and fractures. Their youngest daughter, just 6 years old, is now fighting for her life in intensive care. The scene repeated itself across borders. In southern Lebanon, villages near the Israeli border were turned into ghost towns. When Israeli jets responded with airstrikes targeting suspected Hezbollah sites, the bombs landed dangerously close to civilian homes. One village school was partially destroyed. A teacher who had been staying late, grading papers, was among the dead. Her students held a candlelight vigil the next morning, their grief interrupted by yet another round of air raid sirens. And in Gaza, the situation reached catastrophic levels. Entire neighborhoods lost power after the main electricity plant was damaged. Water supplies ran dry. Emergency vehicles couldn't move through streets clogged with rubble. The health system, already stretched thin by years of blockade and shortages, began to collapse under the weight of hundreds of wounded. Doctors performed surgeries by flashlight. Children with shrapnel injuries waited for hours on concrete hospital floors. One viral image showed a newborn baby being cradled in an underground clinic. Her mother had gone into labor during a bombing raid and delivered the child on a stretcher surrounded by smoke. Meanwhile, in Damascus, families in working-class suburbs huddled in basements as explosions rocked the outskirts of the city. Videos showed terrified children with cotton in their ears to block out the sound of jets. "We haven't slept in days," one father said. "We just hold our kids and pray the next bomb doesn't land on us." Across all sides, civilians were being crushed beneath the weight of politics and power. Social media flooded with heartbreaking footage. A boy digging through rubble with his bare hands, calling out for his brother. A woman holding up a photo of her missing husband. A group of children trying to keep each other calm in a shelter, singing songs to drown out the bombs. None of these people fired missiles. None of them ordered airstrikes. But they're the ones who suffer most. Again and again, every time the guns are drawn, international aid agencies began sounding alarms. The Red Cross, UNICEF, and Médecins Sans Frontières pleaded for humanitarian corridor. But with missiles still flying, even humanitarian convoys weren't safe. In one instance, a UN truck carrying medical supplies into Gaza was struck by a drone. The driver survived, but the vehicle was destroyed. There are no red lines anymore, one UN official said. Everything and everyone is a target now. And while leaders argued in press conferences and foreign ministers met behind closed doors, millions of people were left in the dark, both figuratively and literally. No electricity, no water, no escape. For these civilians, the question wasn't about which side was right or wrong. It was about survival. Would they see tomorrow? Would their homes still stand? Would their families stay together? And as the world debated military strategy and political alliances, those questions remained unanswered, echoing through shelters, through ruins, through the weeping voices of people who never wanted this war. World reaction calls for peace as tensions escalate. As the missile trails vanish into the morning haze and the ground still trembled from overnight bombings, the world finally woke up, and it woke up worried. The United Nations called an emergency meeting of the Security Council within hours. Grim-faced diplomats from around the world gathered in New York, each expressing deep concern and urging immediate de-escalation. But as usual, statements were cautious and consensus was elusive. The United States, a key ally of Israel, condemned the rocket attacks in the strongest possible terms, calling them an unacceptable assault on civilians. Secretary of State officials reassured reporters that the U.S. stood by Israel's right to defend itself, but also emphasized the need to prevent a wider regional war. Behind the scenes, high-level calls between Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh intensified. Iran, meanwhile, took a very different stance. In a fiery statement, Tehran accused Israel of provoking the conflict through reckless aggression and targeted assassinations. Iranian military leaders warned that any further Israeli strikes inside Syria or Lebanon would trigger a regional response. And then came the real threat. Iran suggested that if the strikes did not stop, they might directly intervene. That's when Russia and China stepped in. Russia, with military forces already present in Syria, blamed the crisis on Western interference and occupation. Moscow accused the U.S. of enabling endless instability in the Middle East and called for a multipolar peace conference, a move some saw as a political swipe at American influence. China, aiming to position itself as a peace broker, offered to host neutral negotiations in Beijing. The Middle East deserves peace, not more blood, said a foreign ministry spokesperson. But analysts noted that China's real concern was protecting its growing energy and trade interests in the region. In Europe, leaders were deeply divided. France pushed for an immediate ceasefire. Germany offered to send humanitarian aid. The UK called on all parties to act restraint, but avoided assigning blame. Meanwhile, the European Union activated emergency crisis teams and began evacuating embassy staff from high-risk zones like Beirut and Damascus. Global humanitarian organizations also weighed in. The International Red Cross declared the situation on the edge of catastrophe, while Human Rights Watch condemned the use of heavy explosives in densely populated civilian areas, calling it a potential war crime. But for all the statements, summits, and speeches, nothing was stopping the fighting. Meanwhile, the public began speaking in a language far louder than diplomacy: social media. On platforms like X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, videos of burning buildings, injured children, and desperate pleas from civilians went viral within minutes. Hashtags like #MiddleEastBurns, #StopTheWar, and #SaveOurChildren trended globally. Some users shared satellite images showing the scale of the destruction. Others posted first-hand footage from underground shelters and hospitals. Voices from Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, and Syria echoed the same message. We're tired. We want peace. Why are we always the ones suffering? Celebrities, influencers, and public figures weighed in, some calling for ceasefires, others taking sides, and many simply sharing images of candlelight vigils and prayers. The digital world became a battlefield of its own, with narratives competing for truth, justice, and survival. Back in the real world, airspaces were shut down. Embassies issued emergency alerts. Stock markets dipped. Oil prices surged. And military forces in neighboring countries like Jordan, Egypt, and even Turkey were placed on high alert, fearing that the flames could leap beyond their borders. Diplomats warned, this isn't just another flare-up. This is a crisis that could collapse the region and maybe even drag the world into a broader geopolitical disaster. And yet, despite the panic, the statements, the trending hashtags, The bombs kept falling. What's next? A fragile region on the brink. As the smoke begins to clear, even for just a moment, an uneasy silence blankets the region. Streets once filled with panic are now eerily quiet. Families emerge from shelters, cautiously stepping over debris. Shopkeepers sweep broken glass from their storefronts. The damage is everywhere, physical, emotional, and political. But while the missiles may have paused, the fear hasn't. The biggest question now looms large over the Middle East and the world. What happens next? Because this isn't over, not by a long shot. Israeli military commanders have already stated that the country is prepared for long-term operations on multiple fronts. Reserves have been fully mobilized. Tanks are moving toward the northern border with Lebanon. Warships have been repositioned in the Mediterranean. Surveillance drones now circle almost constantly in the skies above. On the other side, Hezbollah has hinted at further escalation. Militant leaders in Gaza have threatened a new wave of rocket attacks if any ceasefire talks fail. And Iran, the shadow actor behind many of these groups, remains defiant. Its Revolutionary Guard announced it would not stand idly by if allies are attacked. Meanwhile, Syria, already fractured by years of civil war, is being dragged deeper into a proxy conflict it can barely survive. The Assad regime, weakened but still in power, finds itself caught between Israeli airstrikes, Iranian influence, Russian backing, and a battered population just trying to rebuild. And it's not just those directly involved who are on edge. Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey have all placed parts of their militaries on alert. Regional alliances are being tested. Secret back-channel communications between Arab leaders and Western officials have intensified, trying to calm the situation without appearing weak. And in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, policymakers are quietly gaming out worst-case scenarios. What if Hezbollah opens a second front in full force? What if Iran launches direct strikes from its own territory? What if this conflict spills into the Red Sea, endangering global shipping routes? Because that's the terrifying truth. A single spark now could ignite a fire the world can't contain. Despite this, there are glimmers of hope, faint but real. International pressure is mounting for both sides to halt hostilities. Egypt and Qatar are reportedly leading ceasefire negotiations behind the scenes, offering humanitarian corridors and prisoner exchanges as starting points. Some analysts say both Israel and its adversaries may want to avoid a full-scale war, even if they're not showing it publicly. A leaked memo from a European intelligence agency suggested that none of the major actors actually want regional war, but are trapped in a cycle of retaliation, pride, and political posturing. And then there's the voice of the people. Across Gaza, Tel Aviv, Beirut, and Damascus, citizens have begun organizing peace rallies. Small, fragile gatherings where Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike hold candles, not flags. Where they chant for their children's future, not their leaders' revenge. One sign spotted in Tel Aviv simply read, "We've buried too many. We want to live." But peace, real, lasting peace, remains uncertain. In the Middle East, history has taught everyone to be cautious with hope. For now, the region stands at a knife's edge. A single decision, a single strike, a single miscommunication could tip the entire balance into a war that none of them, and none of us, will be able to control. As the world watches, holds its breath, and prays, one thing is clear. The next 24 or 48 hours could shape the future of the Middle East for years to come.